Mrs. Carter, if you truly believe you own every dollar your husband left behind, then someone has been lying to you. Those were the words that stopped me in the middle of the bank lobby only 9 days after my husband's funeral. I had walked into the branch carrying nothing more than my purse, a folder with Harold's death certificate, and the quiet determination to close our joint checking account before another lonely weekend arrived. I believed it would be a simple appointment that would take less than 30 minutes. Instead, it became the moment that divided my life into everything before and everything after. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 69 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I thought grief was the hardest burden I would ever carry. The familiar scent of polished wood and fresh coffee filled the lobby as customers chatted softly while waiting for their turn. I recognized several tellers who had greeted Harold and me for years. They offered kind smiles, whispered condolences, and returned to their work. Nothing felt unusual until the branch manager, Richard Collins, stepped out of his office with an expression I had never seen before. He shook my hand gently, invited me inside, and closed the door behind us. He didn't begin by discussing balances or paperwork. Instead, he stared at the monitor for several long seconds before looking directly into my eyes. "Mrs. Carter," he asked carefully, "have you personally reviewed your husband's trust documents since his passing?" I blinked in confusion. Harold had always been organized. Every important paper was neatly labeled inside a filing cabinet in our home. Whenever I worried about the future, he would smile, squeeze my hand, and tell me that everything had already been taken care of. I trusted him completely, just as I trusted our son, Daniel, after Harold was gone. Daniel had insisted on helping with the mail, insurance forms, and legal notices because, as he put it, I had enough on my shoulders already. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, often reminded me that complicated paperwork only created unnecessary stress for someone my age. At the time, their concern felt comforting. Sitting across from Mr. Collins, however, I suddenly wondered why that comfort now felt strangely heavy. He turned the monitor slightly away, folded his hands on the desk, and spoke so quietly that I almost leaned forward to hear him. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "before we close any accounts today, there is something I believe you deserve to see. It may explain why your husband's final instructions were never fully carried out." For several seconds, I could not answer him because my mind was still trying to understand what those words meant. Harold had never hidden anything from me. We had been married for 42 years, and every major decision had been made together around our old oak kitchen table with a pot of coffee between us. He believed that trust was built through honesty, and I had never once questioned that belief. Richard reached into a locked drawer and removed a thick folder with my husband's name carefully printed across the tab. The edges were worn as though it had been opened many times over the years. He slid it across the desk, but kept one hand resting gently on top of it. "Before I show you these documents," he said quietly, "I need to ask another question. Since your husband's passing, has anyone been helping you with your financial correspondence?" I nodded almost automatically. "My son Daniel has been collecting the mail whenever he visits, and my daughter-in-law Melissa offered to organize the important letters. She said I should focus on healing instead of worrying about paperwork." Even as I spoke those words, they sounded different than they had only a few minutes earlier. Richard gave a slow, thoughtful nod that revealed nothing, yet somehow made my heart beat faster. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. Inside were copies of letters addressed to me over the past 3 years. Every envelope had been sent by certified mail. Every one carried a signature confirming delivery. I stared at the signatures. They were not mine. Richard pointed to the records without raising his voice. "These notices contained updates regarding your husband's trust, beneficiary instructions, and security authorizations. According to our records, they were all accepted at your residence." A cold feeling settled over me. Harold had always insisted that certi. My hands rested quietly on the edge of Richard's desk, but inside my mind, memories were moving faster than I could stop them. I remembered the afternoon Harold had installed a new locking mailbox because he believed important letters should never disappear. He laughed as he handed me the extra key and said that one day I would appreciate how careful he was with the little things. After he passed away, Daniel told me there was no reason for me to walk to the mailbox every day. He said he was already stopping by after work and could save me the trouble. Melissa agreed immediately, insisting that I should spend my mornings resting instead of worrying about bills and paperwork. At the time, their kindness seemed genuine. Looking back now, I realized I had slowly stopped seeing our own mailbox as if it no longer belonged to me. Richard quietly opened another section of the file and placed several photocopies in front of me. Every document listed my home address. Every certified delivery had been completed. Every signature belonged to someone else. I studied the handwriting for several long moments before recognizing it. Melissa had signed her name with the same sweeping letter M that appeared on birthday cards and Christmas gifts every year. My heart did not race. It simply became very still. Richard remained respectful, allowing the silence to settle before speaking again. "Your husband visited me several times during the last 5 years," he said. He believed that protecting wealth meant protecting the person he loved most. He asked us to keep detailed records of every communication. I lowered my eyes toward the papers. Harold had never been suspicious by nature, but he had spent his entire career building a successful construction business. He often said that good people prepared for problems before they happened. Suddenly another memory returned. About 2 years earlier, Harold had asked Daniel whether I was personally receiving all my financial correspondence. Daniel answered so quickly that none of us questioned it. Melissa smiled and assured Harold that she organized everything into neat folders for me because she wanted to make life easier. Harold nodded, yet I remembered catching him watching her with an expression I could not understand at the time. Richard carefully removed a small sealed envelope from the folder. Across the front, in Harold's familiar handwriting, were 5 simple words. "For Evelyn. Open only together." Richard looked at me with quiet compassion before placing the envelope gently between us. "Your husband instructed that this could only be opened if you were present," he said softly. "Mrs. Carter, I believe today is the day he expected might eventually come." Richard waited until I nodded before sliding the envelope toward me. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as though every unanswered question from the past several years had been folded inside. My fingers hesitated for a moment before breaking the seal. Harold's handwriting appeared on the first page, steady and unmistakable. He wrote that if I was reading those words inside Richard Collins's office, then events had unfolded in a way he had hoped would never happen. He reminded me that trust was one of life's greatest gifts, but that trust should always be supported by clear records when it came to financial matters. As I continued reading, my eyes filled with quiet disbelief. Harold explained that several years earlier he had created additional safeguards around our estate, including instructions that certain documents would remain protected by the bank until they were placed directly into my hands. He wanted to ensure that no misunderstanding, no misplaced letter, and no unnecessary pressure from anyone could prevent me from making my own decisions. Richard quietly placed another folder beside the letter. Inside were copies of account authorizations, trust summaries, and correspondence that I had never seen before. Each document matched the dates Harold had mentioned. Together they painted a picture that was very different from the one I believed I had been living. I thought back to countless afternoons when Melissa cheerfully sorted the mail while Daniel assured me everything important had already been handled. I had accepted their help because grief had left me exhausted, and because trusting my family felt natural. Now I wondered how many opportunities one had unknowingly surrendered simply because I believed someone else's reassurance. Richard finally spoke. He explained that there was one final safeguard Harold had established years earlier. It was not located inside the branch office, but inside a secure records facility maintained by the bank. Access required both my authorization and Richard's presence, exactly as Harold had instructed. I carefully folded the letter and held it close for a moment. My husband had not left me a map to revenge. He had left me a path to the truth. As I looked across the desk, I realized my next decision would determine whether I continued living inside comfortable assumptions or finally uncovered everything Harold had worked so carefully to protect. The drive to the secure records facility took less than 20 minutes, yet it felt much longer because my thoughts refused to settle. Richard remained focused on the road, speaking only when necessary, giving me the quiet I needed. The building itself was plain, almost forgettable, tucked behind a row of offices that most people would pass without a second glance. Inside, everything was orderly and calm. After verifying my identification, an employee disappeared through a secure door and returned with a small gray lockbox marked with a reference number instead of a name. Richard placed it on the table between us. "This has remained sealed since your husband deposited it," he said. "No one has opened it." I turned the key with trembling fingers and lifted the lid. Inside was another handwritten letter, several neatly organized documents, and a small flash drive. The letter was the first thing I reached for. Harold explained that he wanted every important decision to remain mine alone, even if circumstances changed after his passing. He listed every account, every investment, every property document, and every place where original records were stored. There was also a page describing the exact process for restoring my direct control over each asset if I ever discovered that information had been withheld from me. Nothing in the box encouraged anger or revenge. Instead, every page reflected careful planning, patience, and respect for the truth. Richard reviewed the paperwork beside me, confirming that each document matched the bank's archived records. He explained that several authorizations had never been activated because they required my personal signature. As I listened, I realized that my future had not disappeared. It had simply been waiting for me to claim it. Before leaving, I carefully returned every document to its folder except Harold's letter, which I held against my chest for a quiet moment. His words reminded me that dignity was strongest when guided by wisdom rather than emotion. As we walked back toward the parking lot, Richard asked whether I wanted to notify anyone about what we had discovered. I looked toward the afternoon sky and slowly shook my head. For now, I wanted everything to remain exactly as it appeared. If assumptions had been made about my understanding of our family's affairs, there was no reason to correct them until every fact had been verified and every legal step had been completed with complete accuracy. When I returned home that evening, nothing looked different, yet I noticed everything with new eyes. The family photographs still lined the hallway. Harold's favorite chair still faced the living room window. Even the stack of unopened magazines on the coffee table remained exactly where I had left them. Only I had changed. For the first time in years, I understood that kindness and trust were not the same thing. I placed Harold's letter inside the small wooden box where we had always kept our most meaningful keepsakes, then prepared dinner for one as though it were any ordinary evening. Just after 6 o'clock, Daniel called. He asked whether my meeting at the bank had gone smoothly. His voice sounded relaxed, almost rehearsed. I answered honestly without revealing anything important. I told him the paperwork had taken longer than expected, but that everything would eventually be sorted out. He seemed satisfied with that answer and quickly changed the subject to weekend plans. A few minutes later, Melissa sent a cheerful text asking whether I needed help organizing financial documents around the house. I stared at the message for several seconds before thanking her politely and explaining that I intended to take my time because reading Harold's records made me feel close to him. She responded with a smiling emoji and wished me a peaceful evening. I set the phone aside without another word. The following morning, Richard called to let me know that the bank had already begun processing the authorizations Harold had prepared years earlier. Every step required my direct approval, and every document would now be delivered only into my hands. Hearing those words brought a quiet sense of relief that I had not felt since before Harold became ill. There was still much I did not know, but the uncertainty no longer controlled me. Over the next several days, I followed my normal routine. I watered the flowers, visited the grocery store, and attended Sunday service just as I always had. To anyone watching, nothing had changed. Yet each afternoon I reviewed another page from Harold's carefully organized records, slowly assembling a complete picture of the future he had wanted me to have. I did not feel angry. I felt prepared. Whatever conversations waited ahead, they would be guided by facts instead of assumptions, by patience instead of impulse, and by the quiet confidence that the truth no longer belonged to someone else. It finally belonged to me.